My name is David Darr, and you're listening to the first episode of the Prime LC Alumni Podcast. The goal of this series is to conduct in-depth interviews of the Prime LC alumni, teasing out what motivations, life experiences, daily routines, etc. have helped them to get to where they are today. More importantly, I hope we can learn how Prime LC has played and continues to play a crucial role in their lives as physicians and as advocates for the underserved Latino community. As current Prime students, it's helpful to have mentors who've been through what we're going through, and so this platform is kind of a way of sharing the wisdom of the Prime alumni in a way that's hopefully useful and motivating. I hope these podcast conversations can serve as fuel for the current and future students to just keep going and push through the difficult times and realize there's a bright future ahead. And so I'd like to introduce our first guest today, which is Parker Duncan, who, to be honest, I couldn't have been happier to start things off with. Many of us recognize Parker Duncan's name as one that's synonymous with the Prime LC program. I mean, he truly is someone who embodies the spirit of social justice through medicine. He's currently a practicing family physician in Santa Rosa, California, but he came a long way from his childhood home in Louisville, Kentucky. His route to medicine was quite unconventional, and we get into this in depth in the podcast, but briefly, his pre-med career spans 4 years in the Navy, followed by time spent in Guatemala, and also as a mental health counselor in the Mission District of San Francisco. After finally deciding to pursue medicine, he applied to UCI and entered as part of the first ever Prime LC cohort. At UCI, Parker's efforts were nothing short of astounding. I mean, he is the quintessential example of a proactive leader. Serving as the founding member of the California Health Professional Student Alliance, or CAPSA, the organizer and co-president of the UCI chapter of the American Medical Student Association, and a co-creator of the still thriving Lobby Day. So in this episode, we dig into a wide range of topics, including a brief history on the beginnings of Prime LC and the efforts of its founder, Dr. Albert Mineta, the importance of a dual degree, Parker has an MPH, as both a symbol and a means of freedom in the medical profession. We look at why medical school is a golden window for getting involved in the community and in social activism, the importance of staying grounded and recognizing our privilege as physicians, and the counterculture of family medicine and how it relates to Prime LC. Finally, he shares why Prime LC was the perfect opportunity for him and how we should embrace it. Anyway, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Parker Duncan and learn something to help you in your medical career and as a member of the Prime LC family. No, we're good. That's cool.
Yeah.
So, do you still live near Santa Rosa or in Santa Rosa?
Yeah, I live in Santa Rosa.
Excellent.
Are you coming up?
I'm not. I was considering it, but I'm actually going to New York, so that's where I'll be ended up.
Well, I think I knew that, or you told me, or I saw it on the announcement or something. It probably was the email announcement that came out.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, so the idea for this podcast was that, a lot of the students were saying that they wanted more interaction with the alumni, and the alumni want to be a part of the, current students' lives, but everybody's so busy, it's hard to connect. And, there are times when people feel like they don't really know the reason why they're doing medicine, especially the first couple years. Whoa. And right. I wanted to find a way to give them a reason and show them that there is a reason for it and that it's going to be there. And hearing it from people like you and the other alumni that have already seen it, gone through it, and they're at the other end, I think it'll be really helpful for them. So
yeah, this sounds great. I love the initiative.
Yeah, thank you. I personally didn't know much about you because we haven't had much of a conversation, but I there's enough about you on the internet that I've been trying to do a little of my research. So
I appreciate it.
If I pull out some random information about you, that's where I got it. But yeah, well, thank you again for taking the time to talk with me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, great. And are we recording, or when do you want to start? Or
yeah, it's just recording, and I'll just kind of
okay.
I'll edit out whatever is, and just make your words sound twisted and evil. That's kind of the goal.
That's going to show some skill. That's going to be great.
But yeah, so I just kind of wanted to, for you particularly, I wanted to start before medical school, because you had kind of an unconventional route to medicine. From what I read, you grew up in Kentucky, you ended up going to Duke and then went into the Navy. And from there, you kind of traveled through Guatemala, and you were a mental health counselor in San Francisco, and eventually ended up in medical school. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that is. You have done your research. That is a very good synopsis.
And so I guess the question for you was, just looking back, how do you really feel that that this route has shaped your career? And, as a physician, and just kind of getting involved in the activism that you do?
I'd say probably two ways. I usually try and get answers down to either one bullet point or three, but I'm going to pick two right now. So the main punchline being that leaving the military for me was a difficult process, but it was a process, and by the time I got to medical school, it was a process of what I call redefining for me how I wanted to be of service to my community. I went into the military, like many would say, like serve my country, and I would say prime and now being a family medicine doc in Santa Rosa, California, is exactly like my redefinition of service to country, service to community. So a bit of the history of while I was leaving the military and looking for what to do, I ended up traveling, living in Guatemala for a while, and became completely intrigued with kind of the hypocrisy of North-South politics, and then became, gringo, functionally bilingual, and that became that component. So kind of a strong interest in Latino health from the perspective of, from a social justice perspective of, there's many ways that we need to be re-looking at North-South politics other than what we were doing.
I see. And were there any particular experiences you had either in the military or when you ended up in Guatemala traveling that made you want to go down the health route rather than just stick to the social service, public service?
No, actually not. Two things again to that. I entered the military actually thinking I'd make it a career, but what I like to say was my Rigoberta Menchú, like Guatemalan moment, is I just had this kind of social political awakening in my life that I wasn't counting on, I wasn't planning on, and unfortunately for me at the time, it happened while I was already on active duty on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Persian Gulf War. And then I had this, oh my gosh, who put me here? This isn't the life that I want to lead. Well, I was a little stuck at the moment. But in no way at the time, prior to that, was I thinking about a health career. So as I made the decision, like, this is not the life I want to lead, and what do I want to do? I left kind of thinking I was going to do something social activist, but first tried to go to law school, or tried to go that route. And kind of law activism, I never could get into law school. Law became kind of social advocacy, became social worker, and I became a pseudo-certified professional psychosocial rehab counselor. It was some long title. And through that, then they needed people to work with the Latino community, most of whom had become Latin American mostly Central American, like refugee community in the Mission District in San Francisco. And through that, all the time, while thinking I'd do some type of advocacy, or then maybe mental health, or then maybe counseling, and then maybe actually psychology, then I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to go be a psychiatrist. And that's how I finally got to med school.
Wow. Okay, that makes sense. It's
it doesn't make perfect sense, right?
No, but I get it, and that's the exciting thing about Prime LC, and I can't believe how you stumbled upon that possibility, was because you came from this route of social justice and activism in the community, and then you found a way to merge that with medicine, and it sounds like the Prime program was the perfect fit for that.
It was, and as you probably know from my history, right, Prime didn't exist when I was applying. Wasn't on the application. Literally, I thought it was a joke when I showed up in October for my Prime interview, and they literally handed me the application then. Although they'd contacted several of us, like, are you interested in this program? I'm like, you got to be kidding. Like, is this, it's nowhere on your website. You sent me no information about it. You're essentially trying to describe exactly what I think I would have told you I wanted to do, or if I could have designed a program. And I had no idea. Plus, I was going to Irvine. I'd never been to Irvine. I thought it was like the Orange Curtain, like expecting this huge bastion of conservatism. And now here's like Al Manetta and Jose Rea. I'm like, are you guys kidding me? And literally, there was literally nothing on the website anywhere. They just hadn't gotten there yet. Mm-hmm. So it was a fortunate twist. It's not like I crafted this whole thing and then found, the Prime. It just happened at the same time.
Right, and so you were part of the inaugural first Prime LC cohort. There's a lot of folklore around it, a lot of legendary, and it's very exciting to hear about it, hear stories about you and the rest of your cohort. But do you feel like because you were part of that initial group that you were able to make even more of it because it was malleable and plastic and could change to how you guys were hoping to move it to?
Well, yes and no. I mean, because we were caught in our own experience, we were so excited to be a part of it, and it seemed malleable at the time, and seemed like the potential was endless. Sorry, I was hearing some weird noise. I'm not sure.
Hold on one second. Let me see if I can fix that. Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay,
I thought it was
sorry.
on my end.
No, it's go ahead. I apologize. Maybe I'll have you start over there. So we were talking about
as Prime went on, whether it was just the product of the program growing and gaining reputation, or the product of our own advancing through the med school years, we get distracted, we go on rotations, then you think about applying to residency, and in residency, and we're all now, the first ones of us, a couple years out of residency and into what I guess we'd call real life practice. And I almost want to use the word lament, or I ponder most days or many days like, wow, this is exactly what Prime is for, and yet kind of how little am I doing for Prime right now, and kind of that notion, exactly what you're trying to address, returning, back to the roots, recontributing to the pipeline, helping people continue on in the pipeline, and really opening up the pipeline on the end to make Prime kind of what everybody wants it to be. Because yes, I'm totally sucked into my, the drama of my everyday, my patients, my clinic, my blah, blah, blah. And every single thing that I'm doing is kind of exactly imbued with the spirit of Prime. And yet on a day-to-day, I'm not contributing to the larger component of Prime, I would say. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And even coming from you as someone who, when anybody thinks about when we think about Prime LC and who embodies it, we think of Parker Duncan, we think of Marco Angulo, and and people like this that really, when you feel like you don't have it in you, you can look at someone like you or like Marco and say, this is why we're doing this. We need to be more like that. And to hear you say that, you still feel the same feelings that we do, even at this point, is really interesting. And I think it makes sense. Is there something that you do to remind yourself more often? Or is it just the setting that you put yourself in? I imagine it's very difficult. So,
well, thank you. Yeah, it's one, I don't know if it was with me already or if it's more kind of something about those formative years in Prime. Like, it just sits with me. And I would say my daily practice, like what being part of Prime, whether it's what got me into the residency I came to, and combined with just my own continuing interests, like I am living and working clinically in kind of like the ideal Prime setting, kind of like for people in, at UCI, it'd be like being at the Family Medicine Center there in Santa Ana. I'm in essentially, Santa Rosa's equivalent of that. We're in the most Latino community clinic, the most underserved, the highest rate of uninsured, undocumented folks. We're dealing with the, extremities of health disparities in our healthcare system right there in our face every day.
And
go ahead.
Oh, I just was wondering if you could maybe just briefly describe what you do, like, over the course of a week. Like, how do you divide your time?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'm a family doc, and I was trained here at the Santa Rosa Family Medicine Residency, which still retains a reputation and I believe a component of training for what's called full spectrum family medicine. At the same time, it honestly put a really strong emphasis on doing excellent primary care family medicine. And those two things are kind of always attention. It's kind of like the more time you spend, rotating with a surgeon, the less you're going to learn about, taking care of folks in a primary care clinic. Some would still argue that they work symbiotically. Like the time I spent scrubbing in, on gallbladder surgeries helps me more in the clinic because I can tell my patient, like, this is what's going to happen. I know what's to expect. And then I know how to see them afterwards in the primary care clinic. So to me, it's all a bonus, but at some level, as we'll all see, or you'll see more in residency, everything's a trade-off. Time you're doing that, you're not doing something else. So I'm a family doctor. I'm trained full spectrum, and so I work at a community clinic doing primary care. And I'm also one of our OB doctors. So I'm part of our OB call team. So we deliver about 700 babies a year through our clinic. And coincidentally, like, our clinic is kind of the partner clinic with the residency clinic. So we both work out of the same hospital. That used to be the community hospital here. Now it's the Sutter Hospital. So my OB call group works very directly with the residents of where I was a residency, with the residency. So on a given week, I'm in clinic 6 or 7 shifts, shift being kind of like a morning or an afternoon, like a half day or sometimes evening. I'm there 6 or 7 shifts a week. I have an administrative half day because I'm what's called a clinic lead, so I'm share responsibility for running the clinic. And then on average, 1 day a week, I'm on an OB call, either like sitting there in the hospital on the deck or taking call by phone. And if somebody comes in to deliver, I go in and usually supervising the residents who are doing the delivery, although sometimes I'm doing it myself directly. That's my clinical life. And one of my greatest struggles and kind of frustrations, and one of the things I'm inspired by this phone call for, is that outside of that is then the rest of the things that I try and do that honestly in med school I spent a lot of time doing. In residency, I specifically told myself spend very little to no time doing, because that's your real high focus time for real clinical learning. And I would say the biggest challenge I'm finding now, 3 years out of residency, is how to really meaningfully build those things back in, because there's such a tension about when to do that. And the tension is just merely time and energy. Personally, I continue activities, those other activities, those prime-related activities, those social activities at a much smaller scale right now than I ever did in med school, and then much smaller than I would ideally be doing.
Yeah, and like you said, it all comes down to how you have a big pie of time and you have to divide it in however way you can. And so that makes a lot of sense. I want to actually touch on something that you just brought up about how as a medical student you had the time and ability to focus on that sort of activism. And I was wondering, maybe could you comment on people that are currently in medical school right now or part of the prime cohorts right now on the unique time of being a medical student and how that you have the ability to create that foundation for activism and maybe carry it forward? Like, what is your perspective on that?
I'll share what perspective I developed while in med school, because that's all I can share. And it's been reinforced now. Somebody told me at the beginning of med school, our original founder of Prime first told us, Al Mineta said to us, nobody gets to be involved in anything. He says, I will forbid you all from being involved in anything for the first 6 months of med school. Once you show me you know how to pass and, if you want honors, figure that out, but pass, he said, once you solidly know you can pass med school, then please get involved and do so, he basically said, as much as you can. But it's really interesting. For the first couple of years, while Al Mineta was there, none of us, the first year group, really respected that until December, that first semester. If you came back from that first semester and you were feeling comfortable, then it was okay, here we go. Mm-hmm. It was interesting as well. In our year, what Prime catalyzed on that campus was a whole level of, activities and activism that frankly did not exist. When we started on UCI, there was literally almost nothing in terms of activism or activities. It was phenomenal. And it wasn't that there weren't a few people already who kind of were trying to do things, but I think that additional level of bringing in prime students kind of tipped the balance, if you will, and all of a sudden there were tons more things happening over the next few years. So, and I haven't been on campus now in 3 or 4 years, I think, so whether it's the same level of activity or more, but I remember at some point thinking, wow, if I were starting now, I don't know how I could not feel the pressure to get involved because there's so much going on. It was really easy to not be involved when we started because there was really nothing going on.
And do you feel that the structure of the program, even in its first year, in its initial time, helped kind of navigate the medical school waters, or so to say, to help you figure out where you should get involved? Or was that something that you kind of took on yourself and your cohort took on individually?
Yes. I would say more of the latter. That there was certainly the structure of Prime that I think helped in many ways, having our extra classes, having all that extra exposure, different types of rotations, different types of lectures. It gave us a broader look at things. But then if you looked at each person in my cohort and for the next couple of cohorts, I imagine it's still true, almost every single one of us kind of grabbed a different piece of the social activism puzzle, if you will. Mine happened to be more around single payer and healthcare stuff. Other people got real involved in the community clinic or the free clinic. Everybody seemed to gravitate towards a more of an activity and an interest. But to then loop my answer back to your prior question of how do I view the med school window in terms of activity? It's a golden window in my view, meaning with the Al Mineta caveat, you got to figure out where you're going to kind of wind up in the pack. And that's what the first 6 months I think his guidance was about. I came to med school honestly thinking, like, I didn't know. I never knew I'd get into med school from my non-traditional background. It turns out that I took the MCAT, and that went really well. And then I honestly, because I worked my butt off so hard in my post-bac program to try to get into med school, and I'd gotten used to being, kind of a gunner in my post-bac. I came into med school thinking, well, let me just see what all these younger folks have, and what's it going to take to be, to get honors, right, to get the H. And I will tell you that that was the first 6 months for me. I spent the first month or two till the first round of exams, and I learned very well for me what it would take to get the H, and I decided that was too much work. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was a whole extra burden. So once I realized to back off and say, oh, I'm comfortable actually being right in the middle of the pack. Mm-hmm. And for me, that meant I could be in the middle of the pack and then have a whole lot more life outside of med school. And while plenty of people could, you could do that doing your own things, you have your own family demands, you have your own whatever relationship. For me, that opportunity was to do other things, prime-related things. And so that was my recipe that really worked. That worked great in med school. And in residency, honestly, that formula did not work because I poured my guts into residency, which meant there was no time, like any extra time in residency that I had was sleep first, eat next, and then, try and have a social life or a relationship outside of that.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. Well, and you bring up a very interesting point, because I think that people that go into medical school, they have this desire to do everything. They want to be proactive. They want to do well in school. They want to join all these clubs, be the president of this and that, and really make everything happen. But what you've kind of described is, that's a good mentality to have, but at some point you got to learn to say yes to things and say no to certain things and prioritize. And so I feel personally, having just been towards the end of medical school in general, prioritizing is such an important thing if you're going to get through anything this difficult and this long of a journey, especially without the, with the delayed gratification that we get. And I think that that's exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, and I'm just going to say something now that relates to one of your other questions, because I realize it's a punchline that's on my mind.
Please.
I feel still very passionate about wanting to make Prime work in terms of for people starting it and for a whole pipeline, and make it still a model for the revolution, if you will, or the transformation of medical education and what it means to be a clinician or a physician. And inspired in a way by your initiative, that inspired in a way I was part of a small group that accompanied Michael Montoya to Cuba in November, investigating that as a potential option, I think, for Prime students, and kind of a couple other synchronistic events. Just literally last month, David, our original cohort, the 8 of us, for the first time since we graduated, got on a Skype call together and talked for the very first time.
No way.
Yes. And we're already in the process of setting up our next one, but with a commitment to let's figure out how to do this and set up at least a model for, okay, we got to stay connected.
That's so encouraging. It's exciting.
Well, I'm glad for your optimism, right? It could be, you could easily take it the other way, right? But I would say it was so nice to have that. Now, on one hand, I also add in the commentary that while I'm not individually in touch with everyone in my own Prime group, and I'm in touch with a lot of other Prime students individually, but large and by hold, or whatever that phrase is, being part of Prime gave me such a support group that is still as valuable to me today as any group of people who I have from residency as well. And that's a pretty powerful influence and support that I wouldn't say I would have walked out of med school without friends otherwise, but that prime connection is in itself extremely powerful.
Yeah, 100%. And not only within the cohort, but among different cohorts in different years. It's really exciting to see how when we're all together, it's just one big family, one big group. And I love going to events like that. And I love, being a part of it because, I didn't go directly into Prime. I found out about it during first year of medical school. And then Yelenia actually helped me speak Spanish over 3 months, just practicing with me at lunch like 3 times a week. And that really helped me to get in. And so being a part of that family was something that I really wanted. And now that I'm in, it's really fun. It's exciting. And honestly, that's kind of what keeps you going. When you're around people who can remind you of exactly why you're doing what you're doing, it's so useful. And so to your point, when you're saying, you were kind of forging your own path as the first Prime cohort. And, for us, at least, we can be thankful that we can look back on previous cohorts, talk to people, have mentors that kind of showed us the route that we need to go to be both a physician and a activist for particularly the underserved Latino community. For you, were there any mentors or people that you found helped guide you in that direction as well?
I think the answer relative to Prime for us, for the first couple cohorts and maybe into the third cohort, I still identify the name Al Manetta with Prime, right? It was his idea. He founded it. He got it going. And I don't have any sense of to what level he's connected or involved now.
Yeah, and we don't actually we don't hear his name come up as much as it should, and that's something that maybe you can give us a little bit of what he did for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was truly the visionary who trained as a physician in Argentina, as in definitely med school, and I think had started residency or done part of residency, and somehow gets into residency on the East Coast, I think Georgetown, as an OB-GYN, becomes not only OB-GYN, but then GYN-ONC. And then, works his butt off as not only GYN-ONC, but then wanting to be an academic. So involved in academic, working at universities for his whole career, comes to UCI, becomes the dean of the medical school. And then the whole time has this vision of, we need to be doing, medical education has got to be doing something better. One, yes, for the Latino community, underserved Latino community, but his vision was really about, we need to change the philosophy, the hearts and minds, how we train ourselves as physicians. And the simple answer I give is okay, we need to be more Che Guevara-like. Maybe we don't need to lead an entire revolution of a country, but that spirit. And in short, this man took his entire professional career, his entire kind of academic, I'm the dean of a major medical school career, and put it on the line. And he lost his career for the sake of founding Prime. So that's just such a, I haven't done that. I don't know. I don't yet know what I don't think I'm willing to sacrifice my whole career yet. And part of that, what am I going to do it for? But here's a guy who's the dean of a medical school, founds this program, starts off great, gets all this credit, and then everyone has their own version of the political story that ensued. But basically, because he was so invested in creating Prime and wanted it to remain, the Prime ideals, he had to sacrifice himself. And so that model still is, that was so powerful for us because that happened. It was happening in the second year, cohort, and he was still there, still fighting for us and hanging on just to serve Prime. So that was a pretty big model. I don't know at what point I'm going to be willing to do that.
Sure. And it sounds like this, one of the things that made him so special was that he had his values. He knew what they were. He held on to them, and he was willing to take risks in very difficult situations that would uphold his values. And that's something that I think we see a lot in medicine in general, is because we have these opportunities where things are really difficult and we can skirt around our values to make it easier. And so we have to decide in those big moments, are we going to stick with them if it's going to possibly, not work out as well for us on one end. But it's if it's our values and we stick to it, then it's worth it, right?
I mean, he certainly taught that, and he lived by it, and it certainly left a huge mark on us, right? So,
yeah, and it's interesting that you chose to talk about him because in one of the things that was written about you, I think is probably something you said about how the counterculture of family medicine can promote systemic changes towards social justice and medicine as community service. And it sounds like that is very similar to what Dr. Mineta embodied, was this counterculture idea. I was just curious if you could maybe expand on what you mean by that in terms of family medicine and how that's affected the way you know.
Oh, well, I'm probably pirating somebody's words there. When family medicine was founded, actually, in 1968, the founding document of it, the first paragraph, refers to family medicine as itself a countercultural presence within the dominant mainstream medicine. And this was 1968. And it was already saying, within the commentary of American medicine, we're losing our focus on like the family, the whole person. We're already becoming too specialized, and we're already beholden to other interests. And family medicine is about reclaiming the original value of like the pride and of we are physicians taking care of a person and a community and looking out for the greater interest and not kind of selling out.
And how do you feel that that connects with Prime in the mission of Prime LC?
Like if anything, Prime is a way of reinforcing that. Prime is a way of modeling that in the scale of medical education. Like family medicine said, we're creating this as a specialty to address this within the bigger picture of medicine. But I don't know what family medicine said about all the people who are coming through the medical education pipeline. And I don't know what it was like in 1968, but certainly the stereotype you'd say currently or when I was coming into med school, right, it was not about let's put a focus on the person, let's, do all the things that Prime talks about. Like we should be social advocates and social healers first, people who are interested in kind of social change and justice and happen to want to exercise that through the practice of medicine.